Good evening, everybody. Wednesday, the 17th of August. Time's ticking. We're almost getting very close to finals time now. What an exciting time for episode number 80 of So What's Been Happening. Oh, this one's going to be a ripper. I can't wait. This one's one of my absolute true loves, as you all know, is the Melbourne Football Club. Been a long-time supporter. Fair to say, die-hard, like most Melbourne supporters. There was a fair period there where we weren't used to finals, that's for sure. We'd almost be packing up and ready to go on holidays as the joke so quickly comes along our table. But not anymore. We are finals bound again. So right now it's just about where we're going to sit. So an exciting last round coming up for sure in the AFL round 23. All right, special guest tonight, Mr. Rodney Balls Grinter, one of my childhood sporting idols, was blessed on me through my uncle. It's interesting with football how generally with a sporting team you are given a sporting team effectively. You don't really get a choice as a kid. You get surrounded by your family or an uncle or someone, and if you're interested at all, or even if you're not interested, you get interested, and you become in my case, a demon. And to be honest, at school, I reckon there was about 2 demon supporters, and we talked to each other, and no one ever really mentioned it too often because we weren't big winners back in the day. This was 85, 86, around that kind of time, primary school days, and then starting to move into a little bit more success or closer to success, smelling success almost around the late 80s. And then bit of a quiet patch again, but some good periods through the 80s, so early 90s, and then it all kind of drifted into what happened in 88, 87, 88, 2000, which are long memories for all suffering Melbourne supporters, but some great times ahead of those as well. And last year, obviously, capping off with the ultimate prize. Who ever thought we were going to get there, but we got there, and it's an exciting celebration for so many people, not just the players, coaches, and the current crop of kind of supporters that go to each weekly game, but every single person that's ever bled red and blue. And it's such a perfect time to talk footy. And I thought it'd be apt with show number 80 to start to talk through players of the 80s and heroes of the 80s. So just before we bring Cuz up and have a quick chat and then bring on our special guest, what we're going to do is we're going to play what we normally do is when we have each show number, we kind of do a bit of research and find a few images and things that happened in the 80s or in relation to 80 or 1980. So here we go. we'll ever forget the DeLorean, cuz. Hey,
It's going to go down as one of the greatest cars. But if you speak to car people, and I'm hand on heart, I'm not a car person, it was a dud. But Back to the Future made it the car that everyone wanted to have.
that's right. I'll tell you what, mate, if your grandpa or your grandpa's grandpa had one in the back shed, it's worth an absolute bomb now. So, what an exciting show tonight.
I heard the other day like hundreds of thousands of dollars they're worth if you can find one like that, or even more.
If you can find one, and on today's used car market, probably double that, mate. It's out of control at the moment. So
that's hilarious.
What an exciting time, mate! I know you're a Bomber man, but you've got some roots in the Melbourne Footy Club, and I think you've like all the boys that jumped on the podcast with us, you all helped sweep me in, mate, and keep me rolling and keep me grounded, most importantly, not let me get ahead of herself last year.
Mate, I am a little concerned here, mate, that you might just blow a valve here, because I know we don't want to make light of your heart situation, mate, but I know how much you love the Demons, and I know that this man had a bit of a soft spot in your heart as well, so I just want you to just ease your way slowly into it tonight, mate. No, is Sitel nearby in case you go a bit funny in the ticker?
Well, I can tell you, if anyone doesn't know, I had an operation 12 months or less than 12 months or so, and ended up with a pacemaker through a low heart rate, which I didn't know what was going on. And then it finally happened. So I've got a bit of a backup plan. So I think I'm absolutely perfect, ready to go for this year's final series. And fittingly tonight, I've pulled out the old retro badge, mate, of old Balls Grinter, and keep it close to the heart tonight, mate. So we're ready to go.
Mate, it's all right. As I said to my young blokes, and I've also just sent a shout out to my mum, who's a mad Melbourne supporter, and also to my in-laws. I've just sent them a quick text as well to jump on, because my father-in-law hasn't been the best of health, and seeing an 80s champion like Rod and a Demons champion of that will hopefully give him a bit of a pick-up as well.
Oh, fantastic, mate. As you know, this is why we put this show together, was to reach out and see how people are going. And it's had some wide-reaching effects that we probably don't even realise. That we have had a couple of messages from people saying, how are things going? Oh, it's great you're doing something. Thanks for supporting us, all that sort of stuff. And honestly, as we say, we're blessed to have guests in general. It saves us talking to each other all the time, mate, and it's great to hear other people's story and find out.
It's the best thing for our friendship, maybe. That's what we'll say.
Yeah, exactly. All right, mate, before we bring him up, the great man, let's... it's fitting that we have to kick off with this.
It's a grand old flag, it's a high-flying flag, it's the emblem for me and for you.
We could sing it all night, cuz, but
I thought we had a quota with that, but I'll let that slide tonight.
Well, I don't think I've played it in the last, probably since we lost, to be fair.
Yeah.
And we're back. We're back with a vengeance. All right, let's do this, mate. Let's do this in style. Mr. Rod Grinter, 134 of the best games for the Demons, 57 goals, and I hope that's correct. 1985 to 1995. That doesn't happen too often for someone to last that period of time back in those days of footy, even in today's games of footy. So very, very much you'd call him a player of the 80s. He was a player of the 90s too, which is an exciting...
and that's an interesting thing. And when Rod comes on, we'll speak to him about that. Like, he's covered a bit of a generation thing as well too, because the game did change a fair bit from the late 80s into the 90s and got a bit quicker, got a lot more professional. So it'll be interesting to hear Rod's thoughts on that.
Well, a lot's changed since those old days in the Junction Oval, mate, that's for sure. So here we go. Let's bring him up, the great man, Mr. Rod Grinter. G'day, Rod. Thanks for joining us.
G'day, boys. Thanks very much for the intro. You've built me up to be bigger than Ben-Hur, so this is great.
That's okay, mate.
That's terrific.
Fair to say you always played above yourself, Rod, in stature. You played tall, mate, always. So, firstly, as I said, thanks for joining us. It's a really exciting time for us as we move into. We sort of set a plan here to do 2 shows or 3 shows, and it's turned into 80, which has been crazy over a couple of years. So we've had a whole different batch of people come on, and exciting to have someone of your sporting stature, and not just sporting stature, mate. You've done so many other things outside of sport as well, and especially in local sport as well. So I'm excited to talk to you about some of those things that are happening in your life. But, mate, firstly, let's go back all the way back. Okay, so let's talk about where you grew up, and was footy your first love from a sporting point of view?
Well, thank you firstly for inviting me on. It's great to be able to reminisce and sort of indulge in my life. So I grew up in a country town called Katandra West, which is about 20 minutes north of Shepparton, in a small little town that was a very sporting town, where we had the local footy ground, tennis and cricket. So as a youngster growing up, played footy during the winter, and then during the summer played cricket and tennis. And my footy progressed pretty quickly. At the local town there at Katandra, they had the midgets, which were the under 14s. They had the thirds, they had the seconds, and they had the seniors. So I played in the midgets, in the under 14s, and then once I was too old to play in that I then skipped the thirds and skipped the seconds and went straight into the first, which was, for me as a young kid, looking up to all of these local heroes of mine at the time, playing with them at Katandra at the age of 15. So I had 2 senior years with Katandra back in 81 and 82, and then was a part of the Melbourne Footy Club's Norm Smith squad, or academy, if you like, in the Shepparton region, and then was invited down to by Slug Jordan to join the Melbourne Footy Club's under 19s back in the end of 1982, and played in the under 19s in 83.
So how old were you, Rod, when you got down to Melbourne?
17. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
right. Okay. So you're very young bottom age.
A young fella, like, I'm a father and a grandfather now. So yeah, some of the things that we did when we were growing up, you left home pretty early. My eldest son, who's now 30, he left home 2 years ago. So he was 28, and my daughter, who's 27, she left when she was 26. So so things certainly have changed since when we were younger and growing up. You got out of home as quick as you could to try and experience life and get a job and see what you do with yourself.
How was that, Rod? My in-laws are from Benalla, so I know a bit of the area and from where you're from and that. How was that as if for a young bloke? Did you have to grow up pretty quick when you first came down to Melbourne?
Yeah, definitely. So I came down. I didn't have a license when I first came down, so was pretty much reliant on a lot of other people to get around. And as a young fella coming from the country, didn't really venture down to Melbourne that often. Well, hardly ever really. I think I went to one VFL game as a young fella. So the city was, this massive, big concrete jungle from a country boy, and actually coming down here to live was quite daunting. And you get homesick. So my mum and dad would come down every weekend and watch me play, and then I'd jump in the car with them and go home back to Katandra on a Saturday night after the game, spend the weekend at home, and then be bumming a ride back to Melbourne on a Sunday night or early Monday morning to come back to work, to footy train and do what we did.
Yeah, I think, Cuz, I think we really underestimate those good old days of how committed players were travelling from all parts of Victoria to come and train first and foremost, and it wasn't really a well-paid career at that point. So to come and train first and foremost and then go back and play, get back, do another job, it was, we expected a lot from them, not really understanding what was happening behind the scenes, fair to say, as a youngster.
Yeah, look, I think as a young fella, like the VFL, you watched it on a Saturday night or Saturday on the telly. You'd see the highlights on a Saturday night during the news. So it was something that, if you loved your footy, It's what you wanted to do, and you replicated those superstars that played in the VFL at the time. So to get the opportunity to come down and play, it had nothing to do with money. It was just the opportunity to be able to play in the best footy in Australia. So that was the sort of the motivator. And then obviously as you get a little bit older, you start to understand things about what am I going to do with my life, how am I going to pay the bills and all those types of things. So, we were looked after to a degree, but nothing like they're looked after right now, which is totally different in so many ways. It's not funny from when I joined the VFL back then, but it was something that we did as basically for me it was an opportunity to get a head start in life coming from a little country town.
And it's lovely how you say that, Rod. You speak about couple of words I picked up on. You said then you spoke about the love and opportunity, and I think, like as a father myself now, as a dad as well, like that's the thing you'd like to impart. Like I've got my stepdaughter, she's 27, she's moved out, but my sons are 18 and 14. Just that ability to impart wisdom on, and I'm involved in coaching at local footy level myself as well too. Just telling young people today, take every opportunity. It mightn't work out for you, but take those opportunities, and even advice to yourself. Like it's interesting you say that. And the other thing you said, the love of the game. You played in the midgets at Katandra West and Katandra, and you loved it.
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, as was the same, you played footy in winter and you played cricket or maybe tennis in summer. That was it. There's so many other choices now, which is great, but it just shows. I'm not saying that the young people today aren't as committed, but that commitment you said to move from basically a small country town to the big smoke because you thought this would make me a better person.
Yeah,
so
and
it's
absolutely.
It's a great story.
Yeah, and you look at younger kids now, and I've got a grandson who's 11, turning 12 in December, and he loves his footy. So he plays footy on a Sunday. But there are so many more options available to younger kids to do things on weekends, and especially down here in the big smoke compared to the country. Because I'm sure if my grandson Lewis was brought up in the country, he'd be doing what I did. He'd be playing footy in the winter and cricket and tennis or basketball. And that's not to say that he's not doing that down here, but there are so many other things that sometimes get in the way of him doing those things, because it's so easy to jump on an iPad or get on a computer or get on a phone and be distracted from all those physical outdoor things that we used to do and probably not took for granted. It's just what you did.
Yep, definitely. And a question from a good friend of ours, another fellow Demon, Jason Innes. Who'd you grow up barracking for, mate, as a kid?
Yeah, when I was growing up, you had to have a team, of course, and my team was the Mighty Tigers. The Richmond Footy Club were my team, and the reason that was my team is my dad barracked for Richmond, and the reason my dad barracked for Richmond was because his dad, my grandfather, played in the reserves at Richmond, so he came down to Melbourne from Katandra, and I'm not sure how many games he played with the Tigers, but he was certainly a star back in the country footy league. Coached Katandra for a dozen years, and obviously played. My dad played a lot of footy in Katandra as well, but Richmond was my team before obviously I donned the red and blue.
Yeah, and growing up as a youngster, left and right foot, or you're predominantly right foot? What was your breakup and makeup?
Yeah, no, I was a right footer, but I was always, and it wasn't really something that was coached into us as young fellas. It was probably more of a natural thing. Nowadays, younger kids are always told that you need to make sure you can kick on the opposite side of you and handball and all those things on both hands. But But for me, it was more of a natural progression that I was able to naturally kick on my left if I was on that side, but I was predominantly a right footer. And yeah, just skills were pretty good as a young fella.
Yeah, and growing up as a youngster, obviously the Tigers. Who was your absolute idol, mate? Who was the number on the back of your jumper?
Well, I didn't get that far. I reckon for me it was more the senior players at Katandra. So where I grew up, as I mentioned earlier, they were who I looked up to, and they were the ones that I had Richmond as my team because you had to have a VFL team, but and the footy is not as saturated, wasn't as saturated back then from a media point of view that what it is today. So you'd watch a game on a Saturday night, you'd watch the highlights, you'd watch the Sunday footy show, and you'd see a few highlights. But my heroes when I was growing up were the guys that played senior footy at Katandra, which nobody would know who they are. But there was the Sidebottoms, which is Steele Sidebottom, who's playing for Collingwood now. His uncle was a star at Katandra, and my cousin Darryl Giles, he was a person that I looked up to and idolised when I was growing up. And David Teague, the ex-Carlton coach and played for Carlton and North, he's actually my cousin. He comes from Katandra. So his father was a star with Katandra. So there's Dwayne Dudgeon, there's the Opies, there's all these legend names from the area where I grew up. They were my heroes when I was growing up.
Yeah, and it was a pretty big, or back then there was divisions or areas, or where you recruited from.
Zones, yeah.
Or zones, yeah, I should say. Yep. Getting down to Melbourne, your first impressions when you got down to Melbourne and your first coach. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so if we start off, as I mentioned earlier, we had the Norm Smith squad in the Shepparton area, which pulled everybody from the zone of the Melbourne Footy Club, which that changed by town. So, I grew up in Katandra. The Hockings grew up in Cobram, which was only 20 minutes up the road. Darren Flanagan, who played with Geelong, lived even closer in Catamatite. So the zone for for the Melbourne Footy Club obviously encompassed Katandra, and then went through Shepparton around Kyabram, Echuca, Kyabram. So you got your Gary Lyons and your Kelly O'Donnells from that Kyabram area. We had that Norm Smith squad there, and my first introduction was got invited down to play with the under-19s as Slug Jordan, the famous Slug Jordan, was the under-19s coach. Progressed through the under-19s, won a premiership in 1983 versus North Melbourne in 83, and then progressed from there into the reserves and seniors. So my first senior coach for the Melbourne Footy Club was the icon of our sport in Ronald Dale Barassi. So again, a person that when I came across him was like, somebody that's not real, because he was such an icon. He was on the TV. He was such a star. And here I am being coached by him, and also sitting next to superstars like Robbie Flower, Peter Giles, Shane Zantuck. Greg Wells was an assistant coach at the time. So all of these players that I'd seen on the TV, I ended up being teammates or being coached by.
How did you find Rod? Shane Zantuck? I've got a bit of a connection to Shane. So my dad used to manage hotels back in the sort of mid-70s, late 70s, and Arnold Brightus, who you may have heard of, he used to play. Him and Shane married each other's sisters, so we got to meet Shane. Yep. And as you know, Shane was a pretty fiery customer at the best of times. Just talk to me about some of the back and forth between him and Barras. That would have been interesting bystander to see and hear.
Yeah, look, Shane was a bit of a mentor for me. So he was obviously an older player when I joined Melbourne, and coming down to Melbourne and not having really an education, not having a trade, didn't know what I was going to do outside of footy. So I had a number of jobs, and the footy club said that they would help out where they could to try and find me employment. And I ended up working for Shane. So I know Shane and Arnold quite well in the sports store, Sportsco business. So
Yep.
I was working for Shane and Arnold out in their Broadmeadows sports store. When I first sort of came down, I was doing Friday nights, during the week, just as a job, and then I'd play footy on the Saturday. But Shane was terrific. He obviously had been around a while, a lot longer than I, and he was one that sort of pulled me into line when I needed to be pulled into line, and yeah, some of those things that we've seen with Barras and him clashing up in Sydney are just iconic sort of snippets of the history of our game and Barras. But yeah, he's a fiery character, and I'm still in touch with Shane. And yeah, he's, like I said, he was a bit of a mentor, and to this day we keep in touch, which is terrific.
You wouldn't meet two nicer men than Shane and Arnold. Just that you hear that salt of the earth analogy used many times. As I said, as a young 7-year-old, when I first met Arnold Brightus, this is the guy who kicked 5 goals in a grand final. For a kid, look, he was amazing. Then as I've gone up and I've seen him over the years, straight away he says to me, he used to call my dad Cock Sparrow, so he used to call me Little Cock, and he would say, "Hi, Little Cock, how's your mum, how's your dad, how's your sister?" So yeah, great to get that connection, mate, and it's great that you're still in contact with him. Yeah, no,
it is. It was a great period of my life. Obviously, as a young 20, early 20-year-old, knocking around with blokes like that who have been through all of the things that you would dream of being through, and from a business sense, were very successful in what they did in their sports stores. And I just saw a message come up there before. Robbie Flower was also part of that franchise Sportsco sports store, and Mark Cross, who was a reserves coach at Melbourne, was also involved in that.
And it's interesting you talk about that. At what stage, and this, from what you said, coming down to the big smoke, as you said, as a young lad from the bush, when did you think, hang on a minute, I can do this, I can make this? At what stage did the penny drop for you, or did you have a couple little sort of moments of self-doubt before you really thought, no, I've got this?
Yeah, I never ever thought that I'd made it, ever, even when I was 30. It was, I remember in the under-19s in the grand final that we won, I ended up getting dragged. Slug dragged me, and I'm on the bench thinking, oh, here I am. I'm 19 years of age and come down for a dream to play league footy, and I'm sitting on the bench. And I didn't think that was going to go any further than that, to be honest. But then, obviously just head down, bum up, and work really hard. And I think I can thank Ron Barassi for he saw something in me that Slug didn't. Slug used to ride me like a horse. Really made it hard for me, which I think in hindsight set me up for what was to come in terms of playing at the highest level, and then what was required to stay at that level for a long period of time. He got me mentally ready, and I think Barras could see physically that I had some attributes that were able to play at that level, and gave me the opportunity, and was able to take those opportunities and hang around the footy club for another 10 years.
Before you came on, Rod, as and I was talking, because you started, I guess, a senior footballer in sort of 85, in the mid-80s, but then finishing in 95, how much had the game changed in that 10-year period of your sort of career, did you notice?
Look, you don't realise it because it goes so quickly. And I remember John Northey saying to us as a young group of footballers that don't waste the opportunity. In the blink of an eye, your careers will be over. And we're 24, 25, going, oh yeah, sure. But it is so true that from my first game in 85 to my last game at the end of 94, because I captained the seconds in 95, it did go so quickly, but it didn't really change a hell of a lot until probably when Barmy came to coach us. So during my whole footy career, I had a job, or we all had jobs. We all worked. Training was started at 5 o'clock. So you were knocking off work at 3:30, getting to training and doing your thing on a Monday, Tuesday, and a Thursday, and then you'd play on a Saturday, and Sunday you'd have a recovery session on a Sunday. It only really the noticeable change when Neil Baum came. I was actually fortunately working at the footy club in the marketing department, and so for me, whatever time we trained, it didn't really affect my employment because my employer were the Melbourne Footy Club. So Barmy came on board and said that we need to train at the same time we play. So we need to be out on the track at 2 o'clock. So that meant that if you had a job, you needed to leave your job at 12 o'clock to get to training, get ready, to be ready to train at 2. So that sort of 93, 94 period was when it started to become really difficult to hold down a decent job. Not to say that you couldn't, but it was, for me, who wasn't in one particular area from an employment point of view, was difficult because your peers in your work would see you leaving early, so you could go to do your hobby or your your career, and then they still had to stay at work till 5 o'clock. They would get a bit shitty, and there'd be a bit of backstabbing. So for me personally, I ended up leaving lots of jobs because of that environment. So then financially, you couldn't really survive on a contract of league footy without supplementing with a job. So so it just so happened that with what Barmy wanted to do, money started to become not easier, but there was more money to be spread across the playing group. And then, as we know now, they're 6 days a week and getting paid, a hell of a lot of money to do something that. And I think I've heard Nathan Buckley talk about this, and it's so true that we don't get paid to play the game; we get paid to train for the game. Because nowadays these guys are there 6 days a week. They love playing. The training and the meetings and the one-on-ones with your line coach and all that sort of stuff is the stuff that you get paid for.
Yep. All right. Fantastic little insight, mate. I really appreciate looking back on those days, thinking of you guys out there training on Tuesday nights and wondering why there was hardly any guys out there, and totally understand why. Recovery, that was kind of the only really recovery session other than, your own time on Sunday, I guess, before you were expected to be back out there learning your craft again. Yeah, no, definitely. It was, look, you look at the guys now and the way that they are committed and the amount of time they put into the game compared to what we did. I personally believe, even though the money, isn't everything, but it's important. We all need it. But I think that the times that I was involved in the AFL, the VFL AFL, were the best times. We had our footy life and we had a life outside of footy, whereas these guys that are involved in it now just have footy because they don't really have a life outside of footy because it's so professional. Everything gets analysed. There's mobile phones everywhere, so you can't do anything because it gets caught and then it's out on in the social media world. And the things that we were able to do as professional footballers or semi-professional footballers, these guys can't do because they are trained to an inch of their life. Like, we train hard during the week, no doubt, and train harder than your country footballers or your suburban footballers. But we were able to go out on a Saturday night and have a really good night on a Saturday night and stay out late and do what you do as young blokes, and then get back into it on a Sunday. That was the cycle. Yeah. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to play. For anyone that doesn't know and hasn't seen Rod, we've got a few guests jumping on that are from Canada and stuff, so they're not totally familiar with our game. And back in the good old days, Rod, we're just going to play a couple little clips of Well, hopefully they make you look good.
Good on you.
Awkward bouncing ball. Cuthbertson able to shrug the tackle. Kicks wide and finds Grinter. He plays on. Oh, good kick. Excellent kick. Glenn Lovett on the end of it. He's causing Geelong plenty of problems, but that was good play by Grinter.
There you go. There's the first one. Beautiful on the left.
On the left, yeah. It was a bit of a wonky kick, but it got to where it needed to get to. And, so like I said earlier, as growing up as a young fella, predominantly I was a right footer, but was able to just naturally have that skill to be able to kick the footy on the left.
Yep. All right, we're going to play another one before we talk a little bit more. Here we go.
The movement up on the forward line. Peter Road goes wide. Grinter behind this time. Oh, he got to the front. That's a top mark. He had no hope from behind Morwood.
One-hander in the end.
That's what we're talking about. He has got skill. Look at this. Wanted the front posse. Eye on the footy, both of them. Morwood hanging on. Well
How did that stick? Oh, great effort, wasn't it?
Well, Rod Grinter has kicked one already. And he's kicked two. And Melbourne are 4 goals to nothing.
Interesting time. So I just want to bring Cuz up with his local footy knowledge and what we know about the game now, just before Rod jumps in. But Cuz, how many footy lessons are there in that little bit of footage? Rod obviously was known predominantly as a backline player originally, but really crafted his game up forward and was incredibly accurate. So things like goal kicking and just a simple routine, I think, was a standout for me there. And that classic lead, get in front, and it'd be interesting to see how some of those decisions are paid these days. What's your thoughts first, Cuz, before we go to Rod?
He did the basic really well, and I don't mean that nasty to you, Rod. He wanted to get to the front, and Shane Morwood, what a great player he was as well, from a great family of players. Yep. He got to the front, so by getting to the front, you gave yourself the best opportunity. You then went back. You didn't look at the wind. You didn't throw the thing up in the air. You had a straight. You held the ball straight. You ran straight. And lo and behold, you kicked the ball straight. Now, he's not watching my eldest son for reasons that we won't need to mention on the show, but as came and watched him play on the weekend, he had a pretty good game. He was lucky to kick 7 goals. Every goal he kicked, though, what sort of kick did he kick?
Drop punt, mate. The good old-fashioned drop punt.
It's
almost doesn't happen these days.
It must do you a head in, Rod, watching them what they try to do when they kick for goal now.
Yeah, look, I think there's a topic obviously going around at the moment with Ben. I think it's Ben King at St Kilda who kicked 5 behinds and really cost St Kilda the game. And it is a lot of it is technique, and then also a lot of it's up in your head. So for me, I didn't think too much about it. One of the things that I always wanted to make sure I did when I was lining up for goal is that I had the footy over my right leg. I got a bit of momentum going forward, and I stayed upright, but I kept my head down. I never looked up to see where the ball was going, and I always wanted to make it obvious to myself that I wanted to look at my knee after I'd kicked. So that kept me upright. So you look at some of the highlights of Ben King that were played over the weekend from his game against, I can't remember who they played, but he's leaning back and the ball's spraying to the left or it's spraying to the right. So for me, it was all just about being upright, running in a straight line, all above my right leg and keeping my head down.
And the other thing too, and as Aswood said, as watches, he's involved at local footy. He watches a lot of local footy. This, I'm going to say inability that when they kick a goal, you've got to come off.
Yeah.
No. As I said, I've been involved coaching at senior level at local footy. I was a line coach last year where I was coaching. If you're playing well, you're letting them come off. And that's at junior level.
Yeah.
Well, state level. I don't understand that. Like back in your day, you had 2 bites on the interchange, and if you're playing well, you're up and about.
Yeah.
And as a player, you would have, I'm assuming, would have not liked to come off if you kicked 2 or 3 goals early.
No, we only came off in my time if you did something wrong or you weren't getting a kick. So nowadays, and I was involved in coaching post 2000 as it became so much quicker and so much. You had to be so fit to play the game. Like, not that we weren't fit when we played, we were fit, but these guys are super fit, and to keep everybody at their absolute maximum level of output. They rotate them off, and we did it at St. Kevin's. I was coaching at St. Kevin's at the school for 20 years, and we introduced rotations at school footy, and we were running over the top of teams at the end of games because our on-ballers had run in their legs compared to our opposition, who were out there for the whole 4 quarters. So I sort of, from a physical point of view, and their fitness advisors and all that, they're drumming it into the coaches to make sure that the players are rested at the right time so that they are performing every time they're out there at their highest absolute level. But I'm with you, Cuz, with the kick a goal. If somebody's kicked a goal, they're up and about. Don't. Their adrenaline is pumping. So leave them out there, and if the ball goes up the other end or doesn't come back down to the forward line, well, then zip them off. But don't kick a goal and run straight off. But I think, and I'm not involved in the AFL system from a coaching point of view to understand this, but I'm sure it's all premeditated. I'm sure that they all have to get a certain amount of time off the ground to keep them up and about during the whole game.
Yeah, I think one player that you don't see run off too often is Buddy. When he's running hot, he stays hot. Tomahawk's the same, Hawkins. Yeah. So similar kind of things. And what I noticed, especially in the grand final last year, is when Melbourne got hot or when the Bulldogs got hot, they kept that run on. And I don't think they actually got a chance to think of, should I be off or not off? Like Fritsch just ran hot at that same time for 3 or 4 minutes and turned the game on its head. So it's interesting. I mean, the midfield and all those kind of positions are a little bit different where you're running all the way through.
But I agree. It's crazy to think that, say if it is Fritchie that's sat there and he's kicked a goal and the ball's been down in the back line for 10 minutes, it goes down, he marks it, kicks a goal, he runs off. Well, he's had a spell for 10 minutes while the ball's been down the other end. But mentally they get a spell. I know being out on the ground, you're mentally up and about for the whole time you're on the ground. So mentally and physically you get a bit of a spell, I suppose.
Well, I think the game's changed so much too, Rod, now that, those players that are backmen are almost all the way up the field and get dragged into the action effectively anyway and then run both ways. So it's such an elite athlete sport now. Honestly, how do you think you'd go in today's game if we transported you straight away? Obviously not now at your age, but when you're in your prime, mate, you're a pretty good runner.
Yeah, I think, I had to work really hard, to be honest. My endurance wasn't great. I used to do twice as much as everybody else. Down at the Junction Oval, I'd get to training because I was working at the footy club later in my career. I was able to knock off a bit earlier and get down there. I'd run around the lake before training, get into the gym, do my weights, and then train, just so that I was at a level of fitness to be able to compete for 4 quarters of footy. So how I would go now, if you watch me run around the track in the mornings here, you'd go, how did this guy ever play league footy? But but it was a fair while ago. I think it was 37 years ago when I started. So it was a fair while ago. But I think anyone that played during my time or earlier, you asked that question too, they would be able to play this game no problem, because they would be trained to a level of fitness to be able to perform their natural abilities out on the ground. Yep.
All right. What I want to do, sorry, Cuz, I want to switch to the other part of Rod's game, and I kind of flipped it on its head and showed the forward component first, and probably more where you ended your career. as well.
Started and finished, yeah. So I started forward and finished forward, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And then the other part of the game, which was probably where a lot of fans would know you there most.
Campbell, the hand pass came over the top. Campbell now puts the ball long down towards the forward pocket. Mew came across, couldn't take the mark. Dean, the hand pass. Hawthorn, get out of it temporarily. Mew comes out. Through came Grinter and got rid of Mew. A hip and shoulders put Mew out. Pritchard puts the ball forward and Mew's in trouble there. But it was a fair hip and shoulder by Rodney Grinter. Good, strong, aggressive football. And Mew looks in.
It's an interesting take, and I wanted to play the rest of that part where the commentators actually, there was no issue with the bump, and that was part of the game, a good, clean bump. Obviously, there was times during your career, Rod, where the game was a different game, let's face it, and the enforcer component was there for both teams. And if you didn't, someone else was going to get you or your other teammate. So the game's changed a lot since you played, Rod. But at what point in your kind of career was that a natural part of your game, just that hard and tough, go at the ball at all costs mentality, or was that a directive sometimes?
No, never a directive. It was the way that I played. Even I remember playing like in the midgets and bowling kids over. I was a short, fat kid when I was growing up, so I had a bit more weight behind me than a lot of the other kids, and knocking kids over, just that's the way that I played. I ran in a straight line. If someone got in between me and the footy, as was shown in that last clip there, what happens. There's a couple in my career where I think it was Barry Stoneham from Geelong, a similar scenario at the MCG. He's running flat out one way and I'm running flat out the other. No one gave an inch, and I ended up getting knocked out. And hobbled off with a crook hip. It was just the way that I played, and I'm a fairly aggressive, competitive person, but more so over the white line than not. Although in my younger days, you would probably have people argue against that off the field, but as we get older, we get mature, and I'm a big softie, really, to be honest.
But it's funny you say that, Rob, because, again, and you've done coaching, I post at your crew as well, the thing that I found frustrating as a coach, especially coaching junior football, so I coach my sons and that sort of their age groups growing up, you can't teach a bit of mongrel. I'm not condoning that, but I was always taught, and I'm about 6 foot, so not dissimilar sort of to your height when you were playing on that, go and get the ball. So if I went for a mark and dropped it, I'd go and get the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And now you coached, oh, no, that's not your role. This guy goes and gets it, whereas I was see ball, get ball. And now when it's great that we've got young ladies playing in the AFLW, and I think that's all fantastic. But sometimes we play with the game and you don't need to play with it. It's a contact sport. I'm never going to condone out-and-out violence, but if the ball's there and two people go at the ball, I love that.
Yeah. No, I think that's the way that our game has developed. It's developed into what it is because it's become so viewed and replayed. And then when you've got young kids coming through and parents who are brought up in a different era than a lot of us, don't want their kids getting hurt. And so, they then have choices. Do they have their son play basketball, or do they have their daughter play netball rather than you have to give an opportunity to play football? Football's a bit rough and I don't want my son or daughter getting injured. So the AFL have got to continue to make sure that we have a stream of younger talent coming through and create an environment that their parents see that it's a safe one. And you're never going to avoid that Cripps incident that happened, which got a lot of publicity just recently, and even the shepherd from the the Bulldogs player against last week as well. That's part and parcel of our game. The thing that's really frustrating is that if it is an accident prior to the Cripps case, you can be rubbed out for it. Like if you head clash, and he had his eyes on the footy and I had my eyes on the footy, but my head hit his head, I get suspended because he got knocked out. It's about, and I don't like that scenario. But we could talk about this all night. But it is what it is, and the players I think do an amazing job in being able to, and they'll adjust to whatever rules and regs are in place to be able to play the game.
I think it's a bit of a throwback too, also, Rod, as you mentioned before, and without trying to sound like a couple of old dinosaurs talking here, but footy in the sort of 80s and even in the 90s, if you played Essendon at Windy Hill, yes, it was a tough venue to go to, but there was an after-match function which the Melbourne players would go to, the umpires would go to.
Yeah.
Now, because of the games become so, I suppose, regimented, they've got to have their ice baths, they've got to do their media commitments, they've got to take their tracker off the back of their thing. If it's a night game, it's 11:30 before they even leave the ground.
Yeah.
And I think we've lost that bit of connection. I'm not saying, and Aaron and I know players who are involved at AFL level still, and they do wonderful work in the community that we never hear about. So I'm the first to say they do a great job, but that's why I think people get a bit of that disconnect with AFL football a bit at the time, where they think those people are earning this amazing amount of money, but when we as the supporters or my kid's age or younger, can he spend time signing it? No, he can't sign it because you're not the endorsed person. Or whereas back in, and I know as is a tragic, my illustrious under-19 career, I signed this kid's thing and that made that kid's life. Now I'm a nobody.
Yeah.
Now, when I took my sons out to Windy Hill, the players who had got a bit older and had kids, they're the ones who would take the time and that sort of stuff. I think that's where the AFL, I think they're trying to, but they just got to try to get that connect back with the community because, as you said, basketball, soccer, they're huge sports now in Australia, and they're competing for our players.
Our younger talent, that's right. And look, in terms of what the current day boys do, you're right. Not a lot of the good stuff gets airtime, and that's not news. That's not interesting. It's when somebody messes up or somebody does something wrong that gets highlighted because that's interesting and it's not normal. Well, not normal, but so getting an autograph off a player, I don't think during my career I ever didn't sign one when I could, unless I was getting rushed away to a meeting or whatever. And you see the players now after games, even though there's these COVID restrictions that they've got to adhere to, they're still going around the crowd, high-fiving, doing selfies with phones, which, for a young kid to have something like that, to be able to put on their wall as they're growing up, as we all would have when we were younger, getting a picture out of the paper or whatever, is fantastic. So I think the players do the best they can, and there are some that, are just not that way inclined, but I think a majority of them do an outstanding job.
And I think as fans too, you've got to be smart when you pick your moment as well too.
Yeah.
Like when they're out having a dinner or having some quiet time, that's not the time to pick your moment. So that's where we can be better as well. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think with that though, as an older, like the current day boys, 100%. Don't let them have their time because they get hassled all of the time. But from a past player's point of view, when somebody that somebody's recognised you and they look at you and they're a bit shy to come up and say good day, and I'll when somebody does, I always thank them for coming up and saying good day because I don't know them obviously, but when they come up and say good day, I used to watch Melbourne, I used to do this, can I have a photo or whatever, I love it. I reckon it's great because it's a connection that he had or she had during a time that was special in my life, and to have it to revisit it, for me, it's I love it. It's great.
And just on that, Balls, I have to tell you a little story about when I was a young bloke. I would have been, 14, 15, coming down to Junction Oval, watching training, as you would on a Thursday night. That was the action night when most of the players would be out there, and training would finish. A lot of fans would, kind of hang around for a few players or whatever. Well, we'd wander into the change rooms, me and another mate or so. Some other nights there was no one there, so wandered in kind of by myself. And to be without pumping your tyres, mate, you were the first one that I'd stand in the corner as a young bloke, and I remember clearly you grabbed me and said, "Come on, mate, come and say good day to the few of the boys. Who'd you like a photo with?" And mate, that speaks absolute volumes. I'll never forget that story. And for me, honestly, that's how I picked up and became. I wasn't necessarily a big, massive fan of the major players. Your Gary Lyons, even though he was a great player. You're super high profile. So Graham Yates for me was one guy that I sat next to, and all he wanted to do was just ask me, "Mate, how you going? What are you doing? How's school?" And I'll never forget it. And right to this day, they're those kinds of players that we talked about, guys not giving them enough credit and all those kind of things before, but that's exactly what players do that just no one else sees. So what happens behind the scenes.
And you really, you don't, well, you sort of, in reflection, you do realise the impact that it has on an individual now, but at the time, you don't think that's a big deal. On Saturday night at a coterie function, I presented a person with a framed signed Melbourne Footy Club jumper in appreciation for the support and the work that this person's done for Melbourne's past players. And he was, and this guy's in his mid-60s. And for me, it was a sign of a thank you. But for me to get the autograph, to get the jumper, to get it signed wasn't a big deal. Like, it was no stress. But for him, it was such a proud moment. He said this to me. It was such a proud moment for him and his family to have that presented to him on that night. He'll never, ever forget it. So you just don't realise the impact that how big or how small it might be you have on a person's life. Yep,
absolutely. And shout out to all those AFL players that do so much for so many people to keep them all engaged. And you're right. The game's a competitive beast, and it's a lot more competitive than it used to be in relation to competing for space. And, there's so many options now for kids to play, and they could remember that moment and play AFL footy for the rest of their life. So it does have an impact, a lasting impact. All right, let's touch on a couple of last things before we let you go, Rod. As you're 100% right, we could talk for hours, but let's start with the best player you played on.
Gary Ablett Senior, without hesitation. He was a superstar, and I played. Dermot wasn't far behind him, but in terms of every time I played against Geelong, I ended up on Gary at some stage. Sometimes started on him, but ended up on him. But he was dynamite from a strength, pace, spring to be able to jump on top of the pack when you think you'd have him covered. His goal kicking, we all know what sort of a first player Gary Ablett Senior was. So by a mile, he's the hardest opponent I've played on.
Yep,
or best.
What about the best player you've either played with or seen? Then, obviously, you said from an opponent perspective, Gary Ablett Senior. What about someone as an opponent, and you'd watch him and just think, "Oh, how good's this bloke?"
Well, he would have to be it. Dermot was great. Playing with Gary was obviously a great leader and just a champion footballer leader. Stephen Tingay was somebody that would do amazing things on the footy field And the other one I'll give a shout out to is my old other halfback flanker, and that was Brett Lovett. He was brilliant, a player as a young kid. Started at Hawthorn and ended up getting the flick from Hawthorn and coming over to Melbourne and being an absolute superstar for Melbourne. And the things that he was able to do across that halfback line were pretty special. And then you have the little cameos where you'd have an Alan Jakovic come into your team for a few years and was an absolute freak. Kicked both sides of his body, dozen goals, multiple goals. It was just a shame he didn't stay in the game longer.
Absolutely. Talk about, I was going to mention him as one of the absolute freaks. But also, speaking of freaks, going back all the other way, what about Mark Jacko Jackson?
Jacko was a player that left Melbourne just as I got there. So I think he must have left Melbourne in 82.
Just missed him?
Yeah, I just missed him. So I never got to train with him or play with him and even play against him, to be fair. But he's a character. He's like, there are characters throughout my career like him. You go Crackers Keenan. But yeah, look, he was fun to watch. He was unpredictable. You didn't know what he was going to do, but he obviously had some ability as well. He could kick some goals.
Yeah.
Two quick ones, Rod. Who gave you your best bake? Which coach gave you, and you just thought, oh no, I want to dig a hole and get out of here quickly?
I'll probably very early. It was Ray Jordan in an under-19s game at Richmond at Punt Road Oval, just before half time. Slug, for those that know Ray Jordan, he used to coach from the wing and didn't need a runner because he could bellow from the wing and you knew what the message was going to be before the runner got there. And there was this game where he'd been into me the whole game, that I wasn't doing this or I wasn't doing that or whatever. And the ball got kicked down and went over my head. And he just said, Jesus Christ, Rodney Grinter, when are you going to get on your man? Blah, blah, blah. And I just said, why don't you go and get effed? And the siren went, and I think, I didn't think much of it. I was just frustrated that it was, yeah. And so anyway, when we're walking off the ground, we're all walking off and a few of the boys are going, I think you're going to be in trouble. I go, what do you mean? Because I'd heard, and I just did it without even thinking. And, he told Slug where to go. I think you're going to be in trouble. And so anyway, we get into the rooms. And normally at halftime in the under-19s, all the parents would come in and the players would all be sitting down having a rest, having a drink. And then the coach would come in and he'd address everybody in front of the parents. And this particular game, Slug got into the rooms and asked all the parents to leave the room. And I'm sitting there going, oh, God. And then he went up to Brett Hutchinson, who was our captain at the time. And he said, Hutchie, there is a player that's in this team that told me where to go. And he didn't look at me. We all knew what was going on. And he said, no one does that. But I'm not going to make the decision. I'm going to leave it up to you. So there's a bit of a method to his madness. I'm going to leave it up to you guys on whether this particular individual stays in this team or not. And walked out of the room. And I'm going, oh, my God, this is the end of it. I'm going to get sacked or I'm going to get told to go back to Katandra. And anyway, as soon as he left the room, it was just all the players. And all the players just burst out laughing. We didn't even have to talk about it. There was no hesitation. Slug came in. Rightio, guys. He was really serious and angry. What's it going to be? And Hutchie said to them that, no, we want everyone that's in this room to be playing without naming a name. But everybody knew that it was me. I knew it was me. So that was a spray without a spray, if you like.
Nice.
Nice. All right, we've got one from a friend of ours, Sam. Where did Robbie Flower rate for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that was remiss of me to leave Robbie out. I played with Robbie from my first senior year was 85, and my Robbie's last year was 87 when we made the finals, which was fantastic for Robbie to be able to, after such an amazing career, to be able to finish, unfortunately for him, not in a grand final, but a final or a couple of finals. He was, as we all know, a superstar. One of the best players in the game, one of the best people in the game. And it's just so sad that he's not with us any longer.
Absolutely. He was definitely one of those players that my uncle always said to me, and I had not number 2 on my back as a kid, for the only reason is my uncle said, okay, here's your jumper, and it's already got a number on it. So, but yeah, how could you not be a lover?
Yeah, can't go wrong with that one.
Absolutely.
How was it from a playing perspective, Rod? Like, I remember obviously being a supporter and that coming up to that final series in 87 and let's do it for Robbie and that sort of stuff. And then, as I said, being in a little part involved at the club at that time as well over that next pre-season. How was that time with dear Jimmy, God bless him as well? That whole sort of the prelim, then the post and trying to get up for the – I remember the T-shirt. I think my mum still got it somewhere, Demons Dominate in 88.
Yep.
Like, how was that next year coming back from where you'd come from, so to speak?
Yeah, look, I think 87 we were certainly on a roll. Like, we had to beat Footscray out at Footscray in that last home and away game, and Hawthorn had to beat Geelong down in Geelong for us to get into the finals. And to make the finals for the first time since 1964 was massive. And then to play North and Sydney and beat them by over 100 points to roll into the preliminary final against Hawthorn, who were an out-and-out superstar team, was awesome. It was a great experience. And, that preliminary final, as we all know, we lose it with a kick after the siren, and Jimmy running across the mark and giving away the 50, and I actually gave away the free kick, so I'll put my hand up there. And Jimmy saved my bacon because all the publicity around that kick after the siren was the free kick wasn't even mentioned. It was all about Jimmy running across the mark and Gary Buckenara then kicking the goal. But the following year, and it was a shame for Robbie, but Robbie broke his collarbone. Dipper ran through Robbie that game and broke his collarbone. Brian Wilson did his hamstring. So if we had have been able to win that, which we should have, we would have limped into that grand final against Carlton in 87, because Carlton was sitting up in the grandstand watching while Melbourne and Hawthorn basically bashed each other up, and Hawthorn go into that grand final with Chris Mew, which was that highlight you showed earlier, not 100%, and a couple of other players that weren't 100%. Carlton rolled them easy. So for us as a group, that really stung, and we worked our backsides off during the pre-season. We went on a training camp in Mansfield, and we ran up Mount Buller 15 Ks, trained really, really hard to be able to then come into the 88 season wanting to get back to where we were. And fortunately, we got through another final series and were able to get to a grand final in 88, which was another amazing experience that I was involved in, but unfortunately came up against this amazing team in Hawthorn, who absolutely didn't give us a look in right from the get-go. But the whole build-up and that 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, we were in the finals and had an awesome time. But it's a bit like 2000 when Melbourne made the grand final that year. Essendon had lost one game, and Melbourne had a really good year, but came up against a team that was just too good. We came up in 88 against a team that was just too good in 88. So worked hard, and it's a bit like, everybody that gets there wants to, and if they don't get the chocolates, they want to get back there, and it's a bloody big hard task to do that, as we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't too many finals that you got to play, Rod, through your whole career. But an exciting time, definitely in the lead up to 88 and right to the grand final phase. Just tell us a little bit about your memories up to the day, ready for the game. And then obviously they tore us apart after that.
Yeah, look, the memory leading up is I remember training on a Thursday night where there would have been probably, 5,000 people or more down at the Junction Oval. I was in the gym doing my weights before training, and my mum and dad and my sister and brother and some family friends had come down to watch training. And I couldn't get out of the Junction Oval gym or change room because there were so many people there to catch up with my mum and dad. I had to climb up through the roof of the gym, climb down to go out to say good day to them. But that's certainly a vivid memory. That week leading up to the grand final, and the actual grand final itself, it went like that. We used to have to wear a uniform, like a suit and tie, to the game, and my dad had come down with a friend of his where I've got tickets, and I'm in the lounge room ironing my shirt, just thinking it's another game of footy, but it's the biggest game of the year, and my dad's friend couldn't believe that I'm there ironing a shirt before I'm about to play in an AFL grand final. But it was just what we did. And I don't really remember going to the ground. I don't really remember. I do remember crossing paths with Ray Jordan, because Ray Jordan was coaching Essendon and they'd played in the reserves, under 19s or reserves grand final, and which they played normally before the main one. And because I knew that Ray didn't really rate me and we sort of clashed, he looked at me and just shook his head and couldn't believe that I was walking in to play in an AFL grand final. But that was a little up your bum.
Definitely.
I do remember that. But everything else is a bit of a blur. John Northey did say to us before the game, after he'd given us his pre-match address, was that go out there, stay as a tight group, run around the boundary line, look at all the crowd, suck it all in, and then game on.
Yeah, definitely an amazing experience. One I'll never forget, just even as a fan to be involved and witness that grand final. It was huge. And we'll obviously never forget that while we were, down convincingly at halftime, we got to see Ben Johnson up on the big screen with the 100-metre final on the same day. I'll never ever forget that. Yeah. So there you go. That was 88. But, mate, just tell us, just before we finish, just tell us a little bit about the current crop of Demons and the experience you had, obviously, not only with the past player group, but just being a lover of the game and a supporter of Melbourne after 57 of the longest years. How did it feel for you? Yeah,
well, look, I'm like no other Demon supporter. I'm mad and love the club, love what they do. I'm obviously passionately involved with the past players and trying to reconnect as many of those as I can to enjoy what's going on. And there's nothing better to have on-field success to make that easier. And we certainly experienced that last year, even though we weren't able to catch up because of COVID. So for me, it was frustrating not being able to be and see any games live. However, it also gave me an opportunity to watch a lot of footy with my family, because normally I'd be at the game. And during, if we talk about the grand final itself, or I was sitting here at home in the lounge room with my whole family watching Melbourne win the premiership, which was special in itself in that we won, and I was able to share it with my family. Whereas if it had been at the MCG, I probably would have been at the MCG with a heap of past players. My family would have been at home here watching it. So that was pretty special and memorable, and something that I'll never forget. This current group, I love them all in the way that they go about what they do. when they come and speak in the media, they are very thoughtful and selfless in terms of what they're trying to do for us, not only for what they're trying to do for themselves, but it's more about us. It's portrayed that way. So for me, I love that side of them. They're obviously very professional in the way that they prepare themselves and the way that they get themselves up for games, and our recruiting staff to be able to pull together a list that from a midfield point of view is, I think they're calling it generational. It's just an amazing group of talented young men that all clicked at the right time last year. And I remember talking to Mark Williams at a game this year, and he was addressing a inner sanctum group and was letting us all know that if you're coming to the footy to watch Melbourne play, expecting them to play like they did in the grand final or during that final series, forget it, because that was all the moons, everything just lined up, and that game in itself, from the 16-minute mark of that third quarter to the end, he said you'll never see that again. So our expectations, obviously, when we go to the footy, is we want them to play to that level, which is a big ask. But I think we've still got a talented enough group to be able to have some sustained success, because they're all only, they're all 23, 24, 25. You got Gorney who's 30 and May who's 30, but the core group of that team is still quite young. So touch wood, injuries don't affect too many of them, and they can get a bit of a roll on this year. They've won enough games, obviously, to get themselves in a position where they're in the finals. Whether we finish third, fourth, second, it's all going to come down. We're not going to know until Sunday night. We'll just hope that they can get the job done on Friday night against the Lions.
Absolutely. We talk about mateship, Rod, and I can tell you that's an absolute beautiful photo, and I absolutely love that. And there's so many of those that I remember flicking back through the archives on, and to have those and to be known during your time too, as clubman, best clubman. I remember you winning, obviously more than once you would have won that award. That used to be something in junior footy that not so talented players used to win, but they were a great part of the club. You changed that in the AFL space, definitely, and fair to say, voted a fair bit by your peers as well. But it's also all the extra work you used to do with the club as well, no doubt.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that I loved about the footy club is that camaraderie and the mateship that you have with they're lifelong friends. I spent 13 years at the Melbourne Footy Club, some from the under. Look at that photo, that's a shocker. Right through till I was 30. We experienced highs and lows. Marriages, breakups, births. So I love when we can get the opportunity, a bit like that December celebration, where we had so many past players come to reenact the grand final at the MCG, was super special. And for me to be able to be a part of helping pull that together and to stand back and see a lot of teammates and past players catch up with mates that they hadn't seen for years and years and years, and see the smiles on their faces is a massive part of why I do what I do.
And I think you would admit this, Rob, but it's pretty common knowledge amongst Melbourne people that you are that person. You are very much the glue that brings the connection of the past to the current players. And you look, and Gary Lyon, like at times he can polarise the community. We all know that. He was a champion footballer, but he often says when he speaks about the events of last year, the work that you did behind the scenes, all people don't know about. So credit to you, mate. Like, to someone not only served your club valiantly on the field and gave it all, but still to this day you're giving as much, mate. So yeah, for me, it's been fantastic. We could talk for a lot longer, but mate, great to have some of the stories and have you on the show, mate. Really appreciate you coming on.
Good on you, cuz. Thanks for those kind words. And like I said, if I didn't enjoy doing it, or if there was somebody else that was there doing it, I'd happily just go along. But you've got to have, each footy club has got to have somebody pulling this together. Otherwise, and I get feedback from players that have played at Melbourne and Richmond at different clubs, and I'm quite proud of the feedback that I get, that Melbourne do it better than a lot of the others.
Yeah, you've set the bar there for sure for generations to hopefully continue. And just great that you've been able to use or utilise the kind of technology that was pretty much sitting in your hand to reconnect some of those players together, which is awesome. Yep. But what I want to do is obviously thank you on behalf of, we could talk forever, Rod, and we'd love to get you back one time and talk a bit more detail about footy and the current footy and what it looks like for you. But I touched on and played a little bit of our club theme song, but it'd be remiss of me not to play our real iconic theme song that so many fans of us know back in the good old days.
Good on you, Aaron. Thanks very much. Thanks, cuz.
We could go on forever with that, but it's such a tribute to how good that part of our club was back in those good old days. There's a fair bit of work to put that little thing together, let me tell you. So what's your memories of that, Rod, back in those that little clip?
Yeah, I do remember. Obviously, the seeing it brings it back clearer, obviously. But that was something that the footy club did really well in trying to promote that success that we were having during that time. And those highlights are fantastic. And the song obviously is a bit spine-tingling as you're watching it. Yeah.
How good to see a couple of staples of Australian pop local band music in the show. I mean, Wendy Stapleton and good old Coxie, the old didn't matter what network, whenever a set of drums came out, you'd always find Coxie behind the drums. Doesn't matter what.
Yeah, a lot of those people, obviously Melbourne supporters, but Jimmy obviously with his talents, with his music, he was great on the guitar and loved jamming it up with everybody. So that was, it was quite humorous when you look at it, but also entertaining as well.
Yeah, and we can't forget or underestimate Chris Connolly and his involvement back in the good old days at the club. I'll never forget one of those. Well, it's probably one of my first, I suppose, corporate kind of functions I went to as a young bloke, which is Trident's night for the Demons. And I'll never, ever forget Gary Lyons' Cher impersonation, mate. It's etched in my mind forever.
Yeah, well, that's what we had. Those Tridents were all people in the media, whether they be on TV. So Greg Evans was a big one, a part of all of that. And a lot of guys at Channel 9 were Melbourne supporters. So to be able to access all of their skits and things that to pull those Trident nights together were fantastic. A lot of fun.
Yep. All right. We're going to finish on just one tip, Rod. And if it's not the Demons, firstly, obviously we all hope that it's the Demons, which is pretty biased. But who will they play? And if they don't win, who will they lose to, in your opinion?
I think we can end up playing Geelong because if we finish fourth and we beat them or they beat us, we go on the opposite sides of the final, so we could end up playing each other again. But I think the season that they've had, they're the standout. The quiet achievers are Sydney. Excuse me. So I think it's out of those two, and obviously us. But yeah, who knows really? It's Brisbane. I don't think so, but we've got them this Friday. So if we don't beat them this Friday, are they a real chance? So, and then you've got Richmond who might sneak in and do some damage. So I'm not a gambling man, thankfully, because if I was, I'd be broke.
Pretty open, isn't
it? It's really tough, and I think the AFL will be sitting back rubbing their hands together with the finish that's coming up, and then obviously the finals. It's going to be in front of us.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to talking to you a little bit closer into the finals. Maybe we might touch base and get you on for a quick snippet and a quick tip, maybe. But let's be biased for a second now. What do Melbourne win the grand final by?
Well, they win by, once they get in there, the way that they've been playing this year, I'll say 3 points.
It's going to be close.
I did last year, Rod. Myself and Lovey, another guy who comes on the show a fair bit, we did warn him about doing this sort of stuff.
Yep.
I'm just going to put the disclaimer up now. I'd be happy to see you win one in Melbourne as well, but don't go the early crow. That's all.
No, exactly right. No, I'm not. I'm certainly not sitting here like I was at the start of the year, thinking we're just going to win every game and win the grand final, no problems. That certainly changed over the last half of the year. So I'm not sitting here for 1 minute thinking that we're a walk-up start to get to the grand final and win it. It's going to be tough, and Geelong are the standout throughout the whole year, and all the stats, if you want to put any weight behind those stats, they're the standout winners as far as the year goes.
I think your best, at your best, beats them still low.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's hope so.
Well, that's right. 100%. If we play at our absolute best, we'll be tough to beat, but we've got a fair bit to go to get to our best from what we've displayed over the last sort of 6 weeks.
We have. All right. On behalf of everyone else on this show, mate, and everyone else that listens to it afterwards, watches it later, Rod, really thanks for your time, mate. We didn't even really hit you with the super hard-hitting normal questions that you'd probably been barreled. So I hope it was a little bit different to what you've experienced before. And it's been great connecting with you and talking to you.
Well done, boys, and good on you for
Thanks,
doing
Rod.
what you do. And love being able to come on and indulge in what I used to do. It's been great. Good on you.
Beautiful. No worries. Thanks
Beautiful.
for everything, Balls. Keep it up, mate.
Thanks, mate. Thank you.
See ya. All the best.
How good was that, mate?
Superstar.
Yeah.
Now, we weren't hard hitting because we were concerned, but it looked like he's mellowed a bit, so we can go a bit more hard next time, mate.
No, he's as he said, he's a little soft underneath, mate. And I can tell you one thing, he was awesome. He was awesome to be around. He totally admitted it himself that white line fever was one of those things that was probably in his bones and in everyone else's that played hard, tough footy like they did. And there's plenty of them out there now currently. They're not all, we can't all judge them for what they did. And some unfortunate incidents, fair to say, amongst people's careers. Hopefully they don't all get branded badly.
People are allowed to make mistakes, mate, as long as you learn from the mistakes you make.
Absolutely. And he's, what he's doing with the past players and in football in general, I think every club would love to have someone like Balls Grinter in their corner. So, mate, this has been a great show. Thanks for indulging me, mate. look forward to it and look forward to the next one.
Just going into watching a bit of footy classified, mate, to hear about my wonderful football club and what developments have happened since I last logged onto the website.
We may have to have a debrief on that next week for next week's show. We'll
Sure.
get Lovey back. Fair to say it might be on his agenda. But a shout out to Sammy. Sammy was going to jump on and he unfortunately couldn't. Shout out to our good friend Jace Berkey. Thanks for jumping on and posting some comments. Robert Wine over in Canada. It's great to have you guys on board. So
lovely to see
it's been a good show.
Lovely to see you, lovely Jan Cusack. Shout out to Jan. Looking forward to your critiquing the show, Jan. You'll always tell me how well I go on the show, so I look forward to that feedback as well when you get a chance.
No worries, mate. All right, take care of yourself. Have
All
a good
mate.
week.
We'll speak soon.
Go D's.